All right, what's up, guys? Today, I'm going to be building the best pay-per-view possible for 2025 and arguably the best, no, not even arguably, the best pay-per-view of all time. And this pay-per-view is definitely a stretch, but man, if we would get this card, it would be an absolute banger. So yeah, let's not waste any time, guys. Let's get right into it. With the early prelim opener on this pay-per-view would be Matt Frevola versus Jim Miller. Now, you already know it's going to be a legendary pay-per-view if you have Jim Miller on the early prelims. Jim Miller, most UFC fights in history, most UFC wins in history. I think he has 27 wins and 44 fights, which is absolutely insane. Jim Miller's a veteran, only fighter to fight at UFC 100, 200, and 300 versus the steamroller Frevola, who's on a bit of a downturn, coming off of 2 KO losses to Fares Siam and Benoit Saint-Denis. I think this would still be a banger of a matchup. It would show if Frevola still had it. And Jim Miller, can the old crafty vet in himself get a big W over a guy like Steamroller, who's actually really close to the rankings? Honestly, at this point, I might pick Jim Miller to win this fight just because Frevola has been chinned really bad back-to-back. So, yeah, I'd pick Jim Miller to win this fight by a decision, maybe even a finish, because Jim Miller low-key be getting finishes. Let's move on to the second fight on the early prelims, guys. We would have Benoit Saint-Denis versus Fares Siam. Now, it's about time Benoit Saint-Denis defends that number 12 spot in the rankings. This guy's been hovering in the number 12 spot in the rankings at lightweight, despite being on a 2-fight losing streak. And, yeah, I just spoke about him. Fares Siam just came off of a brutal KO win over Matt Frevola, a knee straight to the face. One of the most brutal KOs I've ever seen, and then 2 unnecessary punches, or as Jorge Masvidal would say, super necessary punches. This would be an absolute banger of a fight. And, man, I have to be honest, after that last fight with BSD, for this fight, I would have to predict Fares Siam to KO him. BSD, he's only had like 6 years of MMA training, and against guys who've been training their entire life, it's just not enough, man. Maybe BSD can make a comeback, but I'd pick Fares Siam by second round TKO. So, yeah, that's the first 2 fights on the card. In the next fight on the early prelims, I would have to have my boy Rafael Fiziev facing off against Grant Dawson. This would be a banger matchup at lightweight. The grappler Grant Dawson once again testing himself against a gritty, dangerous striker as Fiziev. Fiziev would be coming back off of that long layoff due to blowing out his leg against Mateus Gamrot. And yeah, man, Grant Dawson only has that 1 loss in the UFC, I believe, to Bobby Green whenever he kind of got fraud checked in the striking. And although he did look good in prime form last fight, I probably would lean towards Rafael Fiziev to win this fight, just because, you know, Fiziev, as they say, he's an absolute marauder, dude. Rafael Fiziev on the feet is a different beast, even though he kind of got exposed by Gaethje. But either way, Rafael Fiziev versus Grant Dawson, I do think that Fiziev would be able to keep it on the feet and absolutely piece up Grant Dawson. So I would pick Rafael Fiziev to win this fight by a decision, probably a 30-27, all 3 rounds. Grant Dawson would be spamming takedowns, but missing. Yeah, man. Let's go to this 4th fight on the early prelims. We would have to have Brian Ortega, the Eagle Rebirth, versus Big Meaty Hooks, Josh Emmett. This would be an absolute banger. Brian Ortega versus Josh Emmett. You already know Josh Emmett would be swinging meaty hooks for the fences. And if he connected on Brian Ortega might be going to sleep, because Brian Ortega's chin has been hit by everybody. I mean, Diego Lopez cracked this guy so hard, knocked him out in his last fight, and woke him back up in the same combination. Max Holloway put a beating on him. Volkanovski put a beating on him. I mean, Ortega's taking so much damage, man. I don't know. I might pick Big Meaty Hooks Josh Emmett to put an absolute end to Ortega's career and put him down forever, to be honest. But, yeah, I would pick, honestly, Josh Emmett's 39. I probably would pick Ortega to maybe get a submission win. Josh Emmett was twisted into a pretzel by Yair Rodriguez, so not the best look for Josh Emmett on the ground. So, yeah, I would have Ortega winning this fight by a second-round submission, but I would not be surprised if Josh Emmett were to absolutely flatline him and seize him up like he did to Bryce Mitchell. That would be crazy. Either way, let's move on to the last fight on the headliner of the early prelims. We would have Khalil Roundtree versus Alexander Rakic. This would be an absolute banger. Alexander Rakic, number 6 versus it might be number 6 versus number 8 Khalil. This fight would be an absolute banger. Khalil Roundtree coming off that, honestly, it was impressive in defeat to Pereira. He looked really good in that fight until the 4th round where Pereira ended the Matrix. Versus Alexander Rakic, which I have to be honest, looked kind of flat in his last 2 fights. People say he looked great in the Yuri fight in the first round. He looked okay. And then Yuri autismed his way to a second-round TKO. So these guys both coming off losses recently. Still an absolute banger of a fight at light heavyweight. I probably would pick Khalil Roundtree to win, but it's an intriguing matchup. An absolute banger from two marauders at light heavyweight. Book it for the early prelims. Look at this card already, guys. Tell me this isn't gotten UFC, the best card of all time, written all over it. Freaking look at these fights on the early prelims. Can you imagine how stacked the top of this card's going to be? Well, let me show you. Let's get to the regular prelims, starting off with Gilbert Burns versus Carlos Prates to start off the prelims. This would be an absolute banger. Listen, I know Gilbert Burns is out of his prime. Definitely not in prime form anymore. And it showed in the Sean Brady fight. He looked real rough on the feet. He looked every bit of 38 years old. And Carlos Prates is absolutely the rookie of the year in 2024. 4 fights, 4 KOs. Where do you even hear that? This guy chain smokes and drinks alcohol and is out here knocking out UFC guys. You literally never heard of that. It's insane. They tell you if you're a professional athlete to not smoke, not drink, but this guy's breaking all the rules. He's knocking everybody out. And honestly, I think that Carlos Prates would absolutely chin Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns, I don't know, man. He's just past his prime. He's looking slower than ever. And Carlos Prates would just stick a right hook on that chin and put him down. So I would pick Carlos Prates. Honestly, by first round KO, I wouldn't mind. Just because I think Gilbert Burns is washed. Either way, this is an insane fight. And yeah, I would love to see it. I'd honestly love to see Burns be able to test Prates' ground game a little bit, just to see where he's at on the ground, because we know he's good in the striking and he's dangerous. But either way, let's get on to the next fight on the prelims. We would have Diego Lopez versus Movsar Evloev rematch. It's unfinished business, boys. I need to see this fight again. Movsar Evloev fought Diego Lopez when he was entering the UFC in his debut on short notice. And listen, man, Diego Lopez gave him all he could handle. Diego Lopez was threatening submissions, dangerous on the feet as always. Movsar Evloev just was able to win via control time and just staying glued to Diego Lopez. But he still had to fend off submissions. And this was one of those fights where you could argue there's a perspective where you can see a win for Lopez. Do you value the control of Movsar Evloev, or do you value the submission attempts of Diego Lopez? I don't know. I'm not going to call this fight a robbery. It was a close fight. Movsar won. It is what it is. But ever since that fight, Diego Lopez is 5-0. He's above Movsar in the rankings now because he's fighting more often and he's finishing guys, whereas Movsar is pitter-patting to decision. Movsar Evloev he's good. He's a great wrestler, but he's 8-0, 8 decisions in the UFC. This guy needs to get a finish. As Taporia told Bilal Muhammad, finish anyone, man or woman. Yeah, man. This would be a super banger again. I love the first fight. Both on a full training camp. I would pick Diego Lopez to beat Movsar Evloev on a full training camp. I'm high on Diego Lopez. He's my favorite fighter right now, my boy. No, I don't think he can beat Taporia, but I do think he could beat Movsar Evloev. So I would love to see this rematch, boys. Let's get on to the next fight that I would throw on this card. In the early the prelims, we would have Paddy Pimblett versus Moicano. What the fuck you talking about, lad? I cannot afford to lose. Money Moicano needs money, baby. Let's go. Money Moicano versus Paddy Pimblett. We were finally going to see Paddy Pimblett get tested. His grappling skills, how good are they really? Tested versus an absolute veteran, a crafty vet in Renato Moicano, who just absolutely steamrolled Benoit Saint Denis. That was one of the most one-sided beatdowns I've ever seen. And then Paddy Pimblett, man, he also just steamrolled Bobby Green. So they're both coming off of really good wins. You could throw this on the card and really test where Paddy Pimblett is. If he were to go out there and destroy Renato Moicano in the grappling, dude, people would be saying that Paddy Pimblett might be the next Khabib. Like, what else could you say about Paddy Pimblett if he went out there and submitted Renato Moicano, who's really insanely underrated on the ground? This dude has amazing grappling, and he's really coming into his second prime at 35 years old. So this is the fight I want to see on the prelims of this card, guys. Let's move on to a fight that would headline the prelims. My boy Robert Whittaker versus Cal Baraujo. Now, this would be the chance for the fight nerds to stamp their first title shot. Cal Baraujo, if he were to go out there and smoke Whittaker, he could potentially stamp a title shot. But Whittaker's been on top of the middleweight division for dang near 10 years now. Former middleweight champion. Yes, he's coming off that brutal loss to Hamzat, but let's not pretend like Whittaker didn't just KO Ikram Aliskerov in an absolute beautiful performance. And Cal Baraujo coming off a KO over Paul Craig and Jared Cannonier, which were very impressive wins. I don't know, did he fight Jared Cannonier? Am I a casual? Fact check me in the comments, boys. Did he fight him? And if so, did he KO him? I might be a casual. Either way, Robert Whittaker versus Cal Baraujo, an absolute banger. The karate style versus the absolute marauder in Cal Barajo. And I would pick Robert Whitaker to probably win by a point fight decision, but it's dangerous for him, man. Whitaker's chin has always been a little suspect. So Cal Barajo can absolutely put a nice shot on Whitaker's chin and sit him down, but it would be an intriguing matchup nonetheless. And to look at this card so far, boys, tell me this is not the greatest card in UFC history, and definitely easily of 2025 by far. The greatest in UFC history. This is just the early prelims and the prelims, and look how absolutely stacked it is. Let's move on to the main card, opening with Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley, the rematch. I need to see the rematch. The first fight was a robbery, in my opinion. Yan out grappled O'Malley, and O'Malley might have narrowly won the striking, but Yan landed more shots when it mattered, and he out grappled O'Malley. All right, I'm sounding like I'm just coping, guys. No, listen, it was a close fight, and it could have went either way. Either way, I do feel like they have unfinished business. Petr Yan's 2-0 in 2024. Sean O'Malley's coming off losing his belt to Merab. I do not think he deserves an immediate rematch with only one title defense, and his performance against Merab was embarrassing in my opinion. So I want to see them run it back. Sean O'Malley versus Petr Yan 2. Give the fans what they want. We need a more definitive winner. We need to know who the better fighter is, and hopefully the judges give it to the rightful winner, and it's not a robbery one way or another. And yeah, man, I think the first fight was an absolute banger. It could have went either way, like I keep saying. And Petr Yan looking better than ever in 2024. He just beat Davison Figueiredo, pillar to post, 50-45 them. And Sean O'Malley is coming off that loss to Merab. How hungry is he to get his belt back? Are we going to see prime Sean O'Malley, or are we going to see a guy who lost his belt who's like, man, dude, I don't want to fight the big Russian grizzly bears like Petr Yan? Either way, opening the main card, this would be a beautiful fight to put on. Let's move on to the second fight on the main card. We would have Jack Della Maddalena versus Kamaru Usman. The return of Kamaru Usman for over a year layoff. Went up to middleweight, fought Khamzat Chimaev, looked really amazing in that fight. Arguably fought him to a draw, got 10-8 first round, and then won the second two rounds, or the last two rounds, in my opinion. Versus Jack Della Maddalena, who's been inactive due to an injury, coming off that brutal KO win over Gilbert Burns. And listen, man, people forget, man, Kamaru Usman, the Nigerian Nightmare. I think Kamaru might have a y'all must have forgot type of performance. I think that I would pick Kamaru Usman to beat Jack Della Maddalena by a decision. Just out-wrestle him and just be an absolute wrestling marauder. Hold him on the ground, beat him up down there, tire out Jack Della Maddalena. And yeah, man, I think, like I said, I think Usman would have a y'all must have forgot type of performance. I'm coming to get my belt back. But nah, I don't think he would get the belt back. But I do think Usman is very capable of beating JDM. But the clock is ticking for Usman, man. Like I keep saying, he's going to be 38, I think, in March. So this guy needs to get back in there. Why is Usman taking an entire year off to fight? That's what I want to know, boys. We need Usman back. He doesn't have much of his prime, if any, left. So yeah, Usman versus Jack Della Maddalena in that next fight. Let's move on to the feature fight. It's a rematch that felt like it also had unfinished business. Give me Charles Oliveira versus Max Holloway. Now this is an absolute banger. Max Holloway coming back to lightweight after his KO loss to Topuria versus Charles Oliveira, who looks to be in prime form against Michael Chandler the second time. It is Michael Chandler, though, so can we really say Charles has improved all that much? He did look more patient and a smarter fighter, not just getting carelessly dropped. But him versus Max Holloway, honestly, I would pick Charles Oliveira to beat Max Holloway. They fought a long time ago, and the fight was ended due to Charles having an esophagus injury, if I remember correctly. He had an esophagus injury. The fight was stopped early. It was kind of a shame that it happened that way, but yeah, man, looking at their recent forms, Max Holloway did look good against Topuria, and he absolutely schooled Justin Gaethje on the feet. But Charles, with his grappling and his well-roundedness, I would pick Charles to win by crafty vet decision over Max Holloway. But it's a close fight, and I would not be surprised if Holloway poured it on and got him out of there with a TKO. Let's move on to the craziest fights, guys. The co-main event and the main event. These are absolutely insane. Two of the best fights of all time you can put on. Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev in the co-main event. Pound for pound number 1 versus pound for pound number 2. In my opinion, fighting for the belt, for the number 1 pound for pound status. Yes, over John Jones. And yeah, man, this skill for skill might be the greatest fight in UFC history you could put on. These guys are two of the most skilled mixed martial artists you'll ever see. Well-rounded, no weaknesses. I mean, this would be absolutely insane. And there's all the stories of Ilia Topuria being like the Dagestani Slayer. He out-grapples him. He knocking welterweights out in training. He's he's a grappler who came up and developed the best boxing in the UFC versus the guy in Islam Makhachev who's on a 14 or 15 fight win streak, defending when this fight would happen. And he's beat everybody. He's had 4 title defenses. He's done it all at lightweight. And now Ilya's coming up trying to take his belt again. And man, this would be just an insane fight. I don't have a pick for this fight, man. I probably would lean Islam Makhachev because I think the size difference would be too much. I think he'd be way bigger than Topuria, and he could just bully Topuria in there. But man, Topuria's boxing so dangerous. He could knock anybody out. He has the equalizer, man. And he's underrated on the ground. I don't think Ilya would get bullied by Islam on the ground. I think it'd be a stalemate. So this would be a striking match. And really, do you trust Islam to win a striking match against Ilya? I don't know, guys. This 100% would be a 50-50 fight for me. I don't know who would win. But man, would I be on the edge of my seat. I would literally have goosebumps with these two in the octagon. This probably would be my most anticipated matchup ever in the UFC. Maybe the main event could top it, but this would be absolutely insane to see. Skill for skill, like I said, one of the craziest fights you can ever put on. Let's move on to the main event, boys. The main event of the evening, I think you know what it is. Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. It's the fight everyone wants to see. Now, yes, we want to see Jon Jones lose, and yes, we do think that Tom Aspinall is the guy to do it. Jon Jones, respect to his fighting skills. He's been on top of the game for 16 years, age 21 to 37. He was once the youngest champion at 23 on the roster. Now he's the oldest champion at 37. Crazy to see his longevity, but I do think his time would be up against Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall's 31 years old, a solid 255 pounds straight muscle, moves like a welterweight, one-punch knockout power, dangerous jiu-jitsu on the ground, good wrestling. Granted, Jon Jones' fight IQ and his overall skills as a fighter cannot be understated. I do think he is the more complete and better mixed martial artist, but when we talk about danger factor and knockouts, I think Tom Aspinall might be the most dangerous heavyweight we've ever seen when it comes to like being able to knock you out, being able to finish you on the ground. Just he can finish you anywhere. Whereas Jon Jones, he kind of has to methodically break you down. Jon Jones is not one-punch KOing anybody. So Aspinall can literally go in there with reckless abandon, throw haymakers for the fences, which he's not gonna. He's gonna throw crisp boxing combinations, and I do think he would catch Jon Jones. And I think Tom Aspinall would catch Jon Jones with his silly little guard where he puts one hand by his face and he puts one arm out. I think Aspinall would get past that, land a nice uppercut, sit Jon Jones down, and TKO him on the ground. That would be my prediction for that fight. But I'm not delusional enough to think that Jon Jones has no path to victory in this fight. Listen, it's Jon Jones at the end of the day. He absolutely could win this fight. But it would be dangerous for him, man. I would pick Tom Aspinall, and I do want Tom Aspinall to win because Jon Jones has been ducking and dodging and doing steroids his entire career. We need this guy to get punished for his actions. So give me Tom Aspinall to brutalize Jon Jones inside the first round. And yeah, man, this would be the craziest card of 2025, and I think the best UFC card of all time. If the UFC put a card on like this, this easily would sell like 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. Everybody would buy this pay-per-view or stream it illegally. Shout out to Streamies. I'm kidding, guys. But, you know, this card would be absolutely insane. I think everybody would be hyped for it. Bangers up and down the entire card. And yeah, man, let me know what you guys think. What do you think of this card? How many pay-per-view buys do you think this card would sell? Yeah, I know this card's a bit unrealistic, but this is a card that, man, nothing would get me more excited in terms of sports in my entire life over a UFC card like this. The UFC is by far my favorite sport. I'm so passionate about it. I watch every card. And to see the UFC put on this, Tom Aspinall, Jon Jones and Islam versus Ilya on the same card, Max Holloway, Charles Oliveira, dude, bangers up and down the entire card. This is what the UFC needs. We need fights like this all on one card, man. What's up with these garbage Apex cards and these mid pay-per-view events? The UFC is a multi-billion-dollar company. We need to see fight cards like this. Sure, that this fight card's a little unrealistic, and having this many amazing fights on one card probably won't happen, but the UFC can get close to this, man. They can do better. They choose not to, guys. This is what we want to see. We deserve it as fans. We spend our hard-earned money on these pay-per-view cards, well, some of us. And yeah, man, I dedicate a good portion of my life to the UFC, just being a fan, and we as the fans deserve better than we've been getting. So UFC, if you ever see this video, probably won't, but if you do, put this card together. This is an absolute banger, best card of all time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please drop a like if you did enjoy the video. What do you think of the matchups? What would you change around on the card? How many pay-per-view buys would it sell? I'm out, guys. Comment on the video, leave a like, share, subscribe, all the above. Peace out, guys. Later.